The Healthcare Security Cast is sponsored by 3D Network Technology. Reliability is our core value. Visit www.3dnetworktechnology.com. And by Genetec. Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetec, that's GENETEC.com.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Tuesday, July the 24th. Before we get into the show, just a quick announcement that the IAHSS ACNE, the annual conference and exhibition, has moved to a virtual format taking place on September 1st to September 3rd, 2020. For more information, visit ihhss.org/page/ACE. That's ihhss.org/PAGE/ACE. Also, just a reminder to engage with the Healthcare Security Cast on social media. You can find links to all of our platforms on my website. That's Brian, B-R-I-N-E, Hamilton.com. And now, let's get into today's show. Today, we're joined on the Healthcare Security Cast by Virginia Lauzon. Virginia, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. It's an honor.
And I always like to start off by learning a little bit about the guest. So if you could tell us, who is Virginia Lauzon?
Well, Virginia Lauzon is a certified NLP coach, which means that I use neuro-linguistic programming as my main tool of coaching. I mainly coach entrepreneurs in creating an abundant mindset, an abundant lifestyle, and making a genuine impact as they do that. I have specific interest in emotional intelligence and worthiness work. So that would be my short presentation.
All right. And what led to you doing what you do now?
Well, my first love has always been justice. And after doing a bachelor in civil law, my original plan was to become a lawyer and do class action. And I had an aha moment at 23 years old where I felt that the best way that I could make an impact and that I could contribute to justice was to help people communicate, help people really tap into emotional intelligence and create more wholesome relationships. And I felt that that was really lacking. I saw it in my environment. I saw it all over the news. I saw it in my field. And that's really what sparked an interest and a complete shift in direction for me.
Right. And one of the things that you talked about there was the neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. For some of us who just may not be familiar with NLP, can you tell us a little bit about exactly what it is and kind of the principles behind it?
Absolutely. Well, NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming, is an approach to communication, personal development, and psychotherapy that was created by Richard Bandler and John Grinder in the US, in California, actually, in the 70s. And neurology is really the study of the mind, the nervous system. It's how we think. Linguistics, the L is for linguistics, the study of language, how we use it, the words that we choose and what they communicate. And then the programming, which is the last letter, P, is really the sequence of behaviors, the actions, and how we motivate ourselves to achieve our goals. NLP is kind of like the science of human excellence. Is how we can really tap into excellence and understand how we function.
The other thing that you had mentioned as well is emotional intelligence. So it's kind of one of those buzzwords that's floating around a lot. And, it is something that is important. But just for the context of our conversation, can you tell us exactly what emotional intelligence means and what it is?
Absolutely. Well, I have my own definition, but I always like to start with something that's a little bit more from the books. Psychology Today, which is an amazing website and resource, describes emotional intelligence and says emotional intelligence refers to the ability to identify and manage one's own emotions as well as the emotions of others. So that I like that definition because it's clear, it's short, and it really kind of covers it all. And Peter Salovey and John Mayer, who really were the first people to develop the concept of emotional intelligence, they described it as the ability to perceive emotions, to access and generate emotions, so as to assist thought to understand emotions and emotional knowledge, and to reflectively regulate emotions, so as to promote emotional and intellectual growth. So those are two approaches. Daniel Goleman is really the reference, the more modern reference. He wrote books and on emotional intelligence, so we will be speaking about him and his approaches. But emotional intelligence is so important because it's how to be a human and interact with other humans and deal with emotions.
Okay, so you did touch on this a little bit right there as to why it's important. Can you go a little bit deeper, and why is emotional intelligence something that's so important for leaders, and well, I guess just us in our daily lives as well, but especially for leaders?
Absolutely. Well, I can give you a concrete example of that, speaking face to face versus texting. You can see the gap in, or actually the rise of miscommunications when someone is texting because you don't hear, you can't sense or hear the tone. There are so many elements that are missing that people tend to get into fights via phone, via texting. Emotional intelligence is kind of that in the real world. It's being in a room filled with people and being able to use your tone appropriately, convey the right message so that we're not multiplying senses of, oh, I'm offended by this, I'm hurt by this, I feel invalidated by this. And it's kind of like how to be part of a community, be understood, and really understand the other person. That's why it's so important. It's like, do you want to spend the rest of your life being in texting relationships with people where you don't understand or perceive the tone, you're offended by not really understanding the true intention, and it's just a cycle, and it becomes such a stress factor to not be in a conversation where both are validated and both are kind of in a good space.
Right. You actually reminded me of something that is kind of related, kind of not. I just find it funny. But have you seen the Key and Peele sketch where they it's about text messaging and basically how things can get lost in conversation? If not, for anybody, depending on what platform you're listening on, the link will be in the description. But if you have a chance, I'll send it to you. You should watch it. It's really funny, but it really conveys the message that you're kind of saying about how text messaging versus communicating in person, or even just in conversation, is dramatically different, and you can really change the complexity of a conversation just by not giving that context that comes only with words.
Absolutely. I would love to receive the link. I'll check that out. It's true. It's very interesting. And that's really the image that I love to use for describing emotional intelligence. It's really, some people they lead their lives and their communications really resemble text, and you see the impact of it and how it degenerates, and it's a domino effect of misunderstandings.
Exactly. And so another thing that, just from what I'm hearing, it sounds like obviously self-awareness is really important if you're going to be emotionally intelligent. So just, I guess, maybe understanding your own biases or misconceptions, things like that. Um, yeah, could you touch on that a little bit, like why self-awareness may be important and how it helps you understand others as well?
Self-awareness is absolutely important well, actually, it's so interesting that you point that out because that's one of the five components of emotional intelligence, especially at work, that Daniel Goleman had put together. It's the first key. Self-awareness is important because life, I love this, life is a mirror, which means that the things that annoy us or trigger us or frustrate us in other people are often a reflection of something that we either have, or it's a reminder of an experience, or it comes back to our own views, our own thoughts, and what it really mirrors our own relationship with self. Which means that if I'm in a conversation and I hear someone being very assertive, okay, and it rubs me the wrong way, When I'm self-aware and I really understand how I function and who I am, I see, okay, the person's really assertive. What does that mean to me? I'm being triggered right now because maybe I'm not being assertive in other areas in my life. And I'm upset about that. And then I want to work on that. Understanding why we feel a certain way and why we respond, or why we're annoyed, or why we're inspired, will help us come from a place where we're understanding. We can respond to something from a place of really good self-regulation instead of reacting and then adding oil to the fire.
Excellent. And I guess while we're on the topic, do you want to kind of go through some of the other components of emotional intelligence?
Absolutely. Number one, you just mentioned, which is self-awareness, being able to understand, recognize your moods, how you're feeling, just being able to kind of look at your inner, like the weather channel, your inner weather. Am I really moody today? How is that going to show up in my communications? How is that going to show up in at work? How am I going to, how are my emails going to look? You know, how is my tone going to be perceived, and how is that going to impact your moods, your emotions, and the impact on others? And the second point, again, that is all Daniel Goleman's work, self-regulation. It's really how to control, redirect some of the impulses that we may have. So if the same example, I'm triggered by someone being really assertive, okay, how do I manage that? How do I manage, instead of being a ping pong racket where the ball hits and I'm like, I'm tapping back, take the ping pong ball and have a little moment with yourself before you spit out the ping pong ball. The third component is motivation, which is a commitment, a passion to work for reasons that go beyond the status, beyond financial compensation. That motivation that goes beyond the material is a component of emotional intelligence. So having that purpose. The fourth, which is my favorite, is empathy. The ability to understand or to hold space, but mainly it's like putting yourself in the shoes of other people, being able to put yourself in other people's shoes without assuming that you fully understand the extent or the story, but being able to say, oh, I see how that could have been offensive. I see how that may have been perceived in that way. Okay. And the fifth is social skill. It's managing relationships and building a network with the other components of emotional intelligence, and how to really build connections, how to create trust, how to be magnetic. It's all those things. Social skill. So those are the big five of emotional intelligence, and it goes deep.
Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence versus compatibility. Can you share your thoughts around how we should be navigating the challenges, I guess, that are a result of compatibility issues, and how we apply emotional intelligence in those situations?
Absolutely. I think it is a wide misconception that just because we disagree with somebody else, or just because we don't see eye to eye, or just because, there are just some things that are not really compatible, that it is a lack of emotional intelligence on the other person's behalf. It's easy to kind of throw that arrow of saying this person lacks emotional intelligence because we don't see eye to eye. And that is a really big issue. It's an issue because we put ourselves in a position, in a posture where we're working on this emotional intelligence and we are investing in that and we're reading. Therefore, it can kind of twist things. And emotional compatibility, or just compatibility, is based on needs. The needs that you may have, connectedness. You could look at relationships, intimate relationships with a spouse, a partner. Maybe you're just not compatible. It doesn't mean that there is necessarily a lack of emotional intelligence, or that they are zero in emotional intelligence. It could be emotional maturity too, which is difference. Emotional maturity is described as when you have a high level of maturity, is you decide to apply emotional intelligence. Some people know it, but they're not always going to choose to apply it. So that could be a connection to compatibility. So if I am vegan plant-based and I have, let's say, a connection, a relationship with somebody at work or elsewhere who is an avid hunter, maybe in that sphere, there may be a lack of compatibility in that respect. Does that make this person someone who lacks full emotional intelligence? I don't think so.
Now, you talked a little bit about the lack of emotional intelligence. What are some of the red flags for, I guess, us and that we could see in others if there is a lack of emotional intelligence? How's that going to manifest?
A lack of emotional intelligence or low emotional intelligence, you'll see when the person has a hard time listening. So just plain listening when people are speaking, we're going to cut people off a lot. And one of the things is this inability or lack of desire to understand or hear other people's perspectives. The main red flag I see is someone who doesn't know how to disagree. Somebody who has no idea how to disagree in a harmonious way. It can get spicy. It's okay, especially if both people are into debating, and it could be fair play. If you have never learned or developed the art of disagreeing with people and sharing your perspective in a way that is not offensive and it's not pointing fingers, that is the biggest red flag that I see.
Okay, now just with your coaching career, I'm sure you've had to help some people who maybe had a low emotional intelligence. I guess, could you talk about a little bit of some of those external manifestations? And I don't know if you have a case study where you could kind of talk about how you're able to help somebody turn that around.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I think is important in the coaching environment is to hold a lot of space and to make it a non-judgmental environment, which is ironic because, if I look at my own perception of something, if somebody comes in with low emotional intelligence, my first reaction is like, oh, yikes, that's going to be a lot of work. So to kind of put myself in a detached posture of like, this person is here to learn and I honor that. And I am not a perfect human being either. So like really I have to adjust my lens so that I can meet the person equal to equal and help from that posture and create a safe space so that they can express the things that are showing flagrant lack of emotional intelligence, be received with no judgment. And then I question their perspective, I challenge. And one of the examples that I had was somebody who had a really, really hard time understanding other people's perspective, who was very righteous. So it's like, this is how I do things, and this is how I feel about life, and it's this or the highway. So what I did was I received that with a lot of compassion, and I try to look at where that rigidity came from and why that was such an anchored value or behavior. And working through some of the past experiences or relationships or dynamics, I went to see that that was a way to feel safe. That was a mechanism for that person to feel safe. This is the truth, and this is how I do things, and this is the only way to do things, and other people are wrong. And when we kind of we dug a little deeper as to, okay, how are other ways? What are other ways for you to feel safe? What are other ways for you to feel certain, to feel in control, and to surrender to other things? And are you really losing when you're taking in someone else's perspective, or are you growing? Or is that a way to evolve? And it ended up in something really masterful and beautiful, where the person is now a pro at taking other people's perspectives, and they see that as a win instead of them being wrong and being a loser. It's really the shift of perspective, but it takes patience and time, and it takes a lot of non-judgment from the coach.
If we decide, okay, we want to go down this road to improve our level of emotional intelligence, obviously coaching is an option. What are some other things that we could do as preliminary steps?
Oh, start in your home. Start in your home. That's the first step, I would say, is to start with your spouse, start with your children, start with yourself. Are you giving yourself the space to express? Are you giving yourself the space to have empathy towards yourself? All the components of self-regulation, Self-awareness, the self-awareness with self. Journaling is a great way, is saying, okay, how did I show up today? What can I do better? How can I show more empathy? And to really focus on, maybe the first task is to listen. We are part of a world where people who respond, who are good at public speaking, who are good at rhetoric, they're valued. People who express themselves well, who are public speakers, who have the right thing to say all the time. It's like we listen to that and we're so like, we have to be like them. We have to speak a lot, we have to say a lot. But the key and the beauty and the wealth and the gold is in listening. Take all of that gold in, listen and pay attention, and do the exercise of maybe, closing your mouth a little longer and see what happens. That's a really great exercise. It may sound simplistic, but I cannot tell you how many people have needed this tip.
I could definitely see that being the case. Now, I know my audience tends to be a more tactical group. So I'm just thinking in terms of any, and I'm sure that these exist because I think I've done them before. I just don't remember offhand, but is there any type of assessments that help you determine, where you sit on the emotional intelligence spectrum? Or I know you mentioned Daniel Goleman's book as well. So any other resources that you'd like to talk about that would be valuable?
There are a few tests online. I think that really I would kind of poll around yourself. So family, colleagues, and just have the honest and uncomfortable conversation of, how do you think I'm showing up? Because intention versus perception is completely different. So you may have a really good intent in life, good intentions of showing up and being empathetic and listening and all that, and being a good human being. But how are you perceived? So are you receiving a lot of complaints, or are you being told that you never pay attention, that you don't listen? Are you being told that you're kind of dry in the way that you give directions? Are you being told that you don't smile ever? No, just take that into account and say, okay, what is the perception? And for a more tactical approach, eye contact and the resting face, let's practice that, because your nonverbal communication is very important. And if you're working in security, if you're working in a posture where you have authority, or you're protecting, or you have to be maybe a little bit more serious, well, how can you be serious, formal, but still, smile with the eyes a little bit? So the eye contact, when somebody is talking to you, just stop what the paperwork, stop what you're doing and just listen, just look at them in the eye, take the time, pay attention. That's a good step. That's a good first step.
Right. And now one of the things you mentioned too, prior, when we had some past discussions, was just about soft skills. Because I know a lot of this centers around, what we call the soft skills. And you say, the soft skills they're not so soft. Can you kind of talk about that point a little bit and what you mean by that?
Absolutely. Soft skills. Well, the word soft, I'll tell you why it annoys me. It annoys me because it kind of feels like, oh, those soft skills. Like if you have time at the end of the year, if you ever have like an hour to spare to learn about soft skills, it feels like a good and fun thing to do. It would be a cute thing to do. It feels the connotation of it is kind of like it's recommended, but it's not required. If you have time for soft skills after you've spoken about budgets and strategies and how to increase the actual outcome and cash flow and results and efficiency, let's talk about the soft skills. But the soft skills are what allow for you to do all those things in such a magnified and powerful way, in a way that is human to human. So that's like the connotation of, if you have the time, the recommendation, but not the requirement, kind of like when you have a form and they say required, we need your phone number for this. We absolutely need your phone number. That's how I feel about emotional intelligence. So that's just my personal perspective on the word soft, soft skills, hard skills.
Now, I guess coming to this point in our discussion, is there anything that I haven't asked you yet that you would like to bring up?
Hmm. Actually, yes. We were speaking about red flags, and I have a few other things that could really be perceived as external manifestations of low emotional intelligence or lack of emotional intelligence. And I would say not only cutting people off, which I previously mentioned, the disrespect of boundaries, invalidating words and actions, being dismissive of other people and their experiences. Those are other examples that I wanted to kind of put in the podcast. You know me, Brian.
Absolutely. And I think it's that whole journey of self-awareness and just understanding who you are that is that's helpful. Because some of the things that you mentioned really spoke to me. Like, I know one of the things that an assessment I had done a couple of years ago pointed out is because of my personality type that I probably have a tendency to interrupt people, and I found that that was true, which for what I'm doing now in terms of this podcast isn't really helpful. So that's something that I've had to work on. Another thing, I think we talked about this previously, was my natural cadence is actually very fast. So I had to really, again, for what I'm doing right now, that doesn't work well, because 45 seconds into this discussion, I would have lost you because you wouldn't have caught anything that I said. So, and those are just things that we have to kind of understand and work on. You run into compatibility issues with those, because sometimes if I'm in conversation with someone who talks slow, which there's nothing wrong with talking slow, but if it's someone who talks maybe exceedingly slow, it brings up some of those old emotions. So I have to really be careful to not come back to that person in my more natural cadence, because I'll be very tempted to. Like, I've been waiting to say something for so long that it just, you have to really fight some of those barriers.
Absolutely. That's a perfect example of compatibility versus emotional intelligence. Some people speak excessively slow. They speak really, really slow, and it could be triggering or a little bit frustrating coming from a place of you being so quick paced. So, having that empathy of saying, okay, I'm just going to hold my patience, and learning with the self awareness and the self regulation of like, okay, this is a little uncomfortable, but I'm learning the skill. I'm learning the skill. I'm adapting, and it's all going to be okay. So you are showing incredible leadership. And may I say, are you suggesting that podcasting may be an excellent way to apply emotional intelligence tactics and the self-awareness, the self-regulation? It seems to be pretty effective.
You know what? I wasn't thinking of it that way. It very well could be. I don't think it was necessarily because of the podcasting, but I guess just other things I wanted to do in my career. I realized some of those behaviors were very career limiting, or at least
Wow.
relationship limiting, if you will. So it was just things I had to work on for those reasons. But I guess it's transferred well for this podcast, or some of the other things I'm involved with.
Absolutely. For the people listening, maybe podcasting or being a guest or being a host can help with that self-awareness in the way you communicate, in the tone, in the pace, in how you're perceived and how you understand people, because it's a relational thing. You have guests, you adapt to them, you learn about them, and it teaches you so much about yourself. So you're inspiring, inspiring us all.
Well, I think one of the big elements too is, in doing this, you want to get people in with different opinions, right? You don't
Yes.
want people who are just going to say, or just going to agree with everything you say, because there's certainly times where I don't necessarily agree, or I may not have a really strong opinion towards something that somebody on the podcast is saying, but I really want to get that information out because it's going to help somebody who's listening. So as much as this is my own venture, I do want to make sure to really represent a lot of different opinions and perspectives, and not just my own.
Well, I honor that, and I really commend you for that, because that's a value that we share.
Excellent. Now, moving forward, what can we expect to see from you? What are some of the things that you're working on that you might want to share with us?
Well, I'm working on a lot of goodies. For now, you can book some one-on-one coaching. So I have some packages and programs for one-on-one life and business coaching. Uh, However, I'm also working on something really special directed to women. So I'm working with another fellow coach in the neuroscience field, and we will be launching something very soon. So details to come, but you can see all of it on my social media accounts on my website. I have a newsletter too.
Awesome. Now, in closing, what message would you like to share with the Healthcare Security Cast community?
Well, first, I want to say thank you, that I admire you all for what you do, for your service, for your resilience and your strength. Really want to honor that. And thank you for creating space for these conversations. And you know what? Emotional intelligence, one day at a time, one goal at a time, and it's just going to keep rising if you make it something that is consistent and you make it a priority. And I wish that for all of you.
All right. And finally, how can we connect with you?
Ooh, the juicy part. Okay. Well, my website is virginialauzoncoaching.com. Last name will be written below, but I still want to spell it out. Lauzon. My email is info@virginialauzoncoaching.com. Instagram is Virginia Lauzon Coaching. You see, it gets really original. It's always the same. And my Facebook group is the Empowered Leaders. It's a group where we talk about personal and professional development. Feel free to join. We want more voices. We want more stories and more leaders. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time, Virginia. I really appreciate this, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Brian. It was a pleasure.
And this concludes another episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week when we have a new guest and a new topic. And again, I just want to thank you for the support. So far, the podcast has been downloaded 2,750 times in 36 countries. Thank you again for joining us. And until next time, stay safe and take care.